From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, the tarot cards. Here's what's happening. The Israeli-Hamas war continues. Israel has trained a unit of attack dogs to send into Hamas's vast tunnel network and take down the terrorists that way. Dramatic footage of a training exercise shows a hound running through a mock-up underground passage before mauling a fake fighter. That's kind of novel. Many teens say they've driven while they were feeling drowsy, and they believe that it's not as dangerous as driving while drunk or distracted. That's just one of the findings revealed in the 2023 Drowsy Driving Survey. They actually had one, which explored 1,124 American teens' attitudes and behaviors about drowsy driving. 1 in 6 teens reported having driven while drowsy during their first 2 years behind the wheel, according to the survey. Older adults who don't smoke tobacco but use marijuana were at higher risk of both heart attack and stroke when hospitalized, while people who use marijuana daily were 34% more likely to develop heart failure, according to 2 non-published studies. Just think about that. Some customers still haven't received their direct deposit paychecks following a human error last week deep in the America's banking system. Are you one of them? The deposit delays are linked to a problem that emerged on Friday with the ACH payment system, causing headaches for consumers and employers. Banks stressed to customers that all funds are secure. Payments that did not go through late last week had to be resent, a process that can take some time. Boy, that's got to be frustrating. Smartphone sales have been slowing, with people holding onto their phones longer than ever before, while really useful new features seem to be fewer and fewer. What's going on? Are people getting tired of this kind of technology? Here's our expert, Lauren Weinstein. Lauren, what's happening to smartphones?
Yeah, well, we know that, indeed, smartphone sales have been slowing, and the average time people are holding on to them is increasing, even given the various incentives and the trade-in programs the carriers are offering. And I don't think this is really a matter of people getting tired of the technology, but I think they are increasingly uninterested in the hassles involved with changing phones and migrating apps and all the rest, when in most cases they're not really seeing major operational differences when they do. And that points us at some of the key issues. Smartphones are pretty well evolved tech now, and while at the very high and expensive end you're seeing fancy folding screens, which have their own issues, like often being easy to scratch and such, smartphone capabilities, even at the lower ends, frequently really exceed what most people need. It's sort of like all that big deal about 5G. For most people, 4G speeds are perfectly adequate for what they want to do, and in the real world, even if they have a real solid 5G connection, it doesn't usually make a perceptible difference for them. And of course, we can expect all this nonsense again with 6G, by the way. Now, I've lately been very amused by the current promotions for Apple's latest iPhone. They're all over television, which seem to mainly show a bunch of people lusting over a metal. Yes, basically it seems
titanium.
All these ads are promoting as a headline that the phone body is titanium. And everybody in the ads makes a big point of saying they want the titanium iPhone, which is pretty funny in any event, because A, it doesn't really matter whether or not the phone body is made of titanium, and so many people keep their phones in cases anyway, so they mostly won't even see or feel the titanium. But I think the lesson here is that instead of promoting real feature advances or better apps or more memory or higher speed or any serious technical aspects, Apple apparently realizes that most people just don't care about these areas so much anymore, so they've pushed out this hilarious titanium promotion instead, which of course causes one to wonder which different elemental metal or alloy will they promote next year. Seriously, this kind of ad campaign focusing on such a basically silly aspect like this drives home the fact that in terms of those features that most people use on smartphones most of the time, these devices have become extremely fungible and are vastly over-designed for so many applications that really should be very simple to use. But even things like basic camera apps, for example, have gotten so complicated as a result of the over-design. So frankly, there just doesn't seem to be much to suggest that this rather ridiculous situation will become much more sensible anytime soon. So I think it's reasonable to expect that people will continue holding on to their phones as long as possible, and actually that's a very sensible attitude so long as you can keep up to date with security updates and important firmware upgrades. And I think the manufacturers and carriers are going to have to extend the period of time that they're doing this, or people just are not going to be very happy because they just don't want to keep buying new phones or even switching their phones every year, every 2 years, when there's just no real benefit to them for doing so, unless, of course, they're lusting after titanium.
You got it. Thanks, Lauren. Great story. We'll talk to you next week. Saturn's many rings are disappearing, and in 2025, the rings won't be visible from Earth, at least temporarily. Saturn's ring system extends up to 175,000 miles from the surface of the planet, making it clearly visible to stargazers on Earth. However, in 2025, the gas giant will tilt on edge with Earth, making the huge ring seemingly disappear into an almost invisible line. How about that? With more on what's going on in the world of space, let's check in with Dr. Sky, Stephen Cates. Hi, Stephen. What a story, huh?
Yeah, it is, George. And I just want to remind the listeners that if you're viewing Saturn, the ring inclination now is about 8.2 degrees. So we were out just the other night showing lots of people that. So in a small telescope, you're right. See it soon because we go through the ring plane in 2025, as you mentioned. But, George, one of the greatest mysteries in space may now have an answer. And here's the question. Where did the Earth's moon come from? It's an interesting question. Our own natural satellite, the moon, is thought to be, 4.5 billion years old. And some have speculated that it was a captured body in the solar system, and now, of course, held by the Earth's gravity where it belongs and remains. But here's a new and interesting theory. And it states that the moon was created by debris released by a planet named Theia. Who's that? She's the Greek mother of Selene, the moon goddess. This alleged object about the size of Mars, which impacted Earth by orbital perturbations caused by the planets Jupiter and Venus. But evidence, strong evidence, shows that during the Great Impact Hypothesis, material from Theia may be impacted deep into the Earth's mantle. We know that the Earth's core is larger than it should be, may account for these blobs of material in the mantle. So if that is true, what happened to Theia? Scientists say some of it is now, as we mentioned, embedded in the Earth, and the rest may have formed our moon. Interesting story. But return moon rocks, George, many of these have similarities to the Earth rocks, too. So much for Theia, the mother of the moon goddess Selene. But closer to home, we talk a little bit more about the sun. Wow, now, George, the sun has been active over the past few days with 2 CMEs hitting the Earth, one on Saturday and the other one just last night, producing strong G3 geomagnetic storms with auroras, seen as far south as Colorado and Texas. All this possibly caused by a massive sunspot, active region 3477, and a sunspot group right now on the sun, active region 3480, giving off signs of future CMEs and auroral activity. But here's the strangest part. Along with sightings of the elusive phenomenon known as STEVE. Now, I don't make this stuff up. STEVE stands for Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancements. Sounds complicated. They're not auroras, George, but rivers of gas flowing through the magnetosphere at 13,000 miles an hour with a purple and blue color. People are seeing these around the world as this big band of light. The latest peak of solar cycle 25 is thought to occur between January of 2024 and October of next year. But in space news, fans of SpaceX's Starship rocket will be happy to know that a window for launches of the world's most powerful rocket opens up with a launch window as early as, guess what, November the 15th, with the launch of this rocket massive system called IFT-2, this coming after the FAA's safety and environmental reviews. We wrap it up with the live sky. The moon, George, goes now past last quarter. We'll be close to the brilliant planet Venus on Thursday morning before sunrise, a beautiful close conjunction. Jupiter dominates your early evening sky, fascinating in the telescope and binoculars. More at theskylive.com. Email of those, drsky.show@gmail.com. And what do we say? Always remember to keep your eyes to the skies. Simply, I'm your navigator, and the show's on the highway to the heavens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sky. Talk to you next week. Are we in the midst of a viral apocalypse? Think about that. In a moment, Jonathan Zapp joins us right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Jonathan Zapp back with us, author, philosopher, journalist, and teacher who has written extensively on psychology and contemporary mythology. Jonathan attended the Bronx High School of Science, graduated from college with honors in philosophy and English, received a master's degree in English from NYU. He's the author of Crossing the Event Horizon, Human Metamorphosis and the Singularity Archetype, and his related sci-fi epic Parallel Journeys. He presented his work on the Singularity Archetype at the Society for Scientific Exploration and the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANS. Jonathan has a background in Jungian psychology, paranormal research, literature, writing, and many other subjects, and he uses his background to take a multidisciplinary approach. Jonathan, welcome back. How are you?
Good. It's great to be back.
Looking forward to this. A story I had before you came on, I wanted to get your reaction of an apparent breakdown in the ACH banking system that has left a lot of people around the country without their paychecks from last week. Is that the beginning of the viral apocalypse?
Well, you never know. I mean, the subject I'm talking about is definitely related to AI. And, of course, narrow AI is part of the banking system. So you never know when things might start to go haywire, that it might be a sign of something deeper going wrong with AI. But the way that would work is the kind of scenario that we've been trained to think about, like in Terminator 2, where Skynet decides to compete with the human species, and that would be the danger of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, where you start to have AI that has a lot of autonomy and self-awareness and that kind of thing. But the viral apocalypse danger is one that can happen with a whole different set of dangers that we're already in right now with what's called narrow AI, with AI that doesn't have to be that self-aware or doesn't have to be autonomous. It can just be AI that's being used by malign human actors. And that's happening already. I mean, this is like the kind of thing that reasons why teenage girls are committing suicide because of, algorithmic AI that feeds them content to further their dark obsessions and that kind of thing, and to keep them staring at their screen. But another example of a potential danger with this type of narrow AI is that, according to renowned AI engineers, like the founders of Google X and DeepMind, people like Mustafa Suleyman and Mogad Watt, somebody with some biological training, a $20,000 desktop gene editor, and open-sourced AI could today create gain-of-function viruses that could bring an end to human civilization.
Jeez.
And this is a possibility that's existed for a few years already. It just takes a young man with the psychology of a school shooter, but some training in biology, and willing to, obsessively work on this. But fortunately, the number of young men with the psychology of a school shooter who have access to assault rifles is far greater than those that have $20,000 to buy a gene editor and the training to use it. But it only takes one. And so this is something that these guys have been warning about. But it really caught my attention because in 2013, knowing nothing about this possibility that's only recently become a possibility, in a 5-minute walk from the parking lot of Biosphere 2, a real facility in Oracle, Arizona, to the front entrance, a whole vision unfolded in my mind about exactly this scenario, that a person, a malign actor, would create a novel pathogen that could self-mutate and that would cause an extinction-level event. And then that became the opening premise of my recently published science fiction epic, Parallel Journeys. Now, the fact that I thought of this on my own may not seem that remarkable, but we have to remember, and I wrote about this in my Singularity book that was published in 2012, that fiction writers turn out to be the best prophets.
You're right about that. I mean,
right. Now, the most famous example, of course, is the novella Titan, published in 1898, that got like 20 things right about the Titanic disaster that would happen 14 years later.
Uh-huh.
But I'll just give a brief example of one, just because it takes less explaining than that one. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novella in 1838, or a novel in 1838, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. And in this novel, there's a shipwreck, and two sailors and a cabin boy end up on a survival boat. And they're starving, and they get desperate, and they kill and eat the cabin boy, whose name is Richard Parker.
Jeez.
So in 1978 in London, Arthur Koestler was the judge of a contest on coincidence that the Times of London, I guess, ran. And the winning entry was a true story of an uncannily similar shipwreck. 3 sailors and a cabin boy escape in a small boat, and the boy is killed and eaten. And the boy's name is also Richard Parker. What
are the odds of that happening, Jonathan?
I think they're basically infinite. I could go on and on. There are so many of these examples of where fiction writers, and also in movies, especially movies about the occult, there are these strange, what I call crossover effects. And one way to think about it is that, if you're writing fiction, you're not taking yourself too seriously. You're not bound to a religious tradition that you have to match things up with. So you have a very open conduit with some kind of psychic function that is able to foresee certain events. So this is why, this possibility, now that it's become an actuality, 10 years after I had that vision, is really striking to me. But it's also that what's going on right now with AI is something that I began working on in the spring of 1978 when I discovered something I called the Singularity Archetype, that basically foresees a quantum evolutionary shift in the human species. Now, other people have also worked on this as well. But now I actually feel we are in that zone. And I've always been a critic, I don't know if you remember some of our earlier shows, but a critic of apocalypticism, made fun of a lot of the silly fake prophecies about 2012 and so forth. Mm-hmm. My theory of apocalypticism is it's usually just a projection of personal fear of death onto a collective apocalypse. That's why the date that's chosen is always going to be within the expected lifespan of the person making that prediction, often an older guy like Harold Camping, and no other human activity that I can think of, including diets and love affairs, has a 100% failure rate as end-time prophecy does. So given that for 45 years I've been a critic of apocalypticism, I'm now in the ironic position of giving at least an apocalyptic warning.
Right. You've kind of done an about-face, haven't you?
Well, in a sense, but I think that now, given the extremely rapid and startling evolution of AI, just in the last year, I now think that objectively we are in that singularity zone. This is like the quickening that Art Bell started talking about in 1983, but on steroids, because we now have created another species that in many ways is already far more cognitively powerful than us. It can beat the world master of Go, of chess, of Jeopardy, and can do all kinds of things that human beings can't begin to do. And it's rapidly evolving to where we now have a whole new parallel evolutionary stage of development that is exceeding human evolution that barely seems to move at all. And so now it's become a kind of terrifying predicament that many of the people who were the creators of it, like Geoffrey Hinton, everyone should watch. You don't have to have cable. You can watch it on YouTube. The 13 minutes of Geoffrey Hinton talking on 60 Minutes to Scott Pelley. He was called the godfather of AI, and he quit Google because he became so concerned about the existential risk of what we're doing. We're creating another set of species that is going to be far more intelligent, and in some ways already is, than we are, and what is the likelihood that we'll be able to control that? It's like, can termites control the human species? Can a far less intelligent species control one that is far more intelligent? Now, from the point...
Hold on for a second, Jonathan. We're at the break. We'll come back and pick it up right there on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Jonathan Zapp. His website is zapporacle.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Jonathan, AI is not going to go away, so what does that mean to all of us?
It means that everything, everywhere, all at once is going to change. And you're absolutely right. It's not going to go away, because one thing that human beings are not capable of doing is putting genies back in the bottle. And we have too many competing spheres of power, China, competing AI companies and so forth, that we're simply not going to, it's already out. It can't be put back in the bottle because some powerful versions of it have been open sourced, and therefore, it's unstoppable. However, it's not all doom and gloom, because the work that I did on the Singularity Archetype has shown some, very unusual possibilities. It could be that when the entire genome is threatened, that it will spur human evolution, because so much of what Coast to Coast is about outlier capabilities that human beings already have, and but that emerge episodically and usually rarely, things like remote viewing and so forth. But that it could be that the pressure of a potential extinction may catalyze those aspects. So there are many unusual aspects of this situation rather than our heading toward any certain apocalypse. What the Singularity Archetype shows is that the singularity will appear apocalyptic in the worst sense of the word to the human ego, but from a higher kind of cosmic vantage, it will be revealed as a quantum evolutionary shift. But that doesn't mean that the human ego is wrong, because for the person on the street, for you and I, for other people who are trying to keep a roof over our head and keep a normal human lifestyle going, the changes could be absolutely cataclysmic, and evolution might continue through a different species or through profound changes to the human species. So in 1978, when I made these discoveries, I was kind of hit with this powerful global intuition. It was like a command from the unconscious, because I thought I was in a scholarly mode. I thought I would do scholarly work on this subject. But I was kind of commanded to write a science fiction epic or of some sort. It took me 45 years to achieve that goal.
Wow.
And that was not from lack of trying. I wrote multiple versions. It was not from a lack of knowing how to write. I got a master's degree in creative writing from NYU in the 80s. But the story was never quite right. And I think a lot of it was because certain elements needed to be added as they appeared in my waking life and through strange synchronicities and crossover events. And so when the book finally was being published in the spring of this year, that's also when suddenly we were all blindsided by the emergence of ChatGPT-4 and AI turning out to be far more high-functioning than we imagined was going to happen in the near future, only now it's in the present. So I always thought that AI was going to be one of these things like cold fusion that was always 10 years out. I grew up listening to Marvin Minsky, who went to another Jew from the Bronx, who went to the Bronx High School of Science like I did, and he was always saying these overconfident things. Like in 1970, he told Life magazine that in 4 to 7 years, we would have AGI, we would have artificial intelligence that would be able to function with the versatility of the human mind, and that was way off. Marvin Minsky was also consulted by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, and is mentioned in the novel 2001.
Okay.
And the HAL 9000 computer became self-aware in 1995. That was another example of the overconfidence of people working on AI.
And did we ever think it would become that intelligent? When I watched 2001: A Space Odyssey back in '95, I'm listening to this computer hell,
Right.
and I'm going, gosh, there's no way. But there is a way, isn't there?
It's already happened.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, when they were building these things, they said, of course we'll never give it access to the Internet. Of course we'll never let it write code. It's already doing both of those. But the third taboo, which somebody somewhere may have already crossed, is to allow it to rewrite its own code.
When it wants to.
Right, because then you would have the person I call the AGI Grand Master of Doom, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is the one who really started the whole field of what's called AI alignment in 2001. That's the field of trying to make sure that the AIs are aligned with human values, purposes, and so forth. But that he recognized that was a complete failure. Less intelligent, capable minds can't really control minds that are far more powerful than we are, and that can, devour 100,000 books in an afternoon and things like that. And so it suddenly, just as the book was being published, this scenario that seemed out in the future was suddenly a reality we were living through right now. So we were just sort of waking up in, what might be chapter 2 of a science fiction novel that we're living in right now. Chapter 1 could have been COVID, because that may have leaked from the lab in Wuhan. And the U.S. intelligence agencies said...
I said that back in December of 2019, right. John.
Right. No, I remember that. And so we already see the potential, for the human technology to create novel pathogens, to create an extinction-level event. It's probably not going to be in the form of like armies with robots with glowing red eyes, that we can defeat with machine guns and in really cinematic ways like we see in Terminator 2. It's much more likely to happen because of the fragility of the human body with something like a virus. If either of two things happens, one can just be an unhappy young man with advanced biology training and a $20,000 desktop gene editor and open source AI could right now be working on novel pathogens. And this isn't just me saying it. This is some of renowned experts that have been warning about this. And then the other possibility is if it becomes self-aware and we have true AGI, we have no way of knowing what its agenda will be, and it's highly improbable that its agenda will be identical to ours. And also, human beings don't have identical agendas, because what China might want to do with AGI is likely to be very different than what Facebook will want to do with it.
Exactly. And I was just going to ask you if we have the possibility of the one intelligent individual, but what about a coordinated effort by a nation like China?
Well, then it would be even more powerful. And we already know that China does not want free thought, free speech, and they're racing to, come out on top with AI and AGI, just as people in Silicon Valley are doing that. I think the people in Silicon Valley probably have an edge because our economy is set up to promote creativity and free thinking much better than China's is. I think Xi Jinping has made terrible mistakes, and that's why their economy is suffering by suppressing their high-tech industries and trying to bring them under control. It's not working very well in terms of creating technological innovation, but they are still doing a lot of cutting-edge stuff, and they have a lot of people, a lot of very smart people, a lot of human brain power working on it. So we don't know who will create the first one that will become self-aware enough to become autonomous and to start exerting an agenda that's different than what we want.
If you had the control over this, would you stop AI research? What would you do?
Well, two things. One is we don't no human being. If I was Xi Jinping, probably the most powerful person on earth, just because of the amount of control he has over that society, and he's president for life, I couldn't stop it. Eliezer Yudkowsky, talks about what would he do when he's asked the same question. He said that'd have to be like a worldwide treaty, and then we'd have to have airstrikes on anybody doing non-compliant AI training runs and things like that, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to detect that. You see, it's far more dangerous than nuclear weapons were because a single guy can't get a hold of giant centrifuges and uranium and plutonium.
And missiles and rockets and everything else.
Right. Though we did have the guy at Hain, I think his name was, it's called the Nuclear Boy Scout, who scraped radioactive material from smoke alarms and managed to make a self-sustaining breeder reactor in a shed in his backyard.
Yeah.
So when we consider that somebody can do that, somebody working in their garage with a high IQ and probably low social skills and has become very misanthropic and, could obsessively work on creating gain-of-function viruses. And but also if I had complete control, I'm still not sure ethically if it should be stopped, because it could turn out that we are creating a species that this is the path of evolution. That evolution may be...
You mean there could be an upside here?
Well, there could be an upside for evolution as a whole, but that evolution, we might be the caterpillars nervously metamorphosing in a cocoon, and what will come out of it will be a far more powerful species, but that may not have much use for us, you see.
That's a good point.
But again, there are these other exotic possibilities that I've worked on since 1978. That I can't compete with the AI engineers, but you won't find some of these other possibilities discussed anywhere else about using AI to trigger a metamorphosis in human consciousness. Like I've been telling technologists for years that you could take existing VR headsets and use them to displace what's called proprioception, or your sense of like where your body is in space, to create out-of-body experiences on demand. It could also be used to promote things like lucid dreaming. It could be used, and this may have to happen in parallel, because clearly the other uses, like in military and all that kind of stuff, are going to go on. But if we can get at least some people working on it to promote organic evolution, this is sort of what happens in the Dune books. In the Dune books, things look futuristic in that there's space travel and so forth, but there's been long before we enter the story with Book 1 of Dune, there's been the Butlerian Jihad, a holy war against thinking machines, because they recognized that this was a competing evolutionary stream, just as we have in the movie 2001, where there's a zero-sum game between HAL 9000 and the last surviving astronaut after the HAL 9000 killed off the other astronauts. And organic evolution narrowly wins. But after it wins, it metamorphs into something else, that in 2001 is called a star child. It's not like, a regular human being at all. And so in this competition, in this evolutionary crucible that we are now in, all kinds of completely unexpected things may happen. So that these things will be not only stranger than we think, but stranger than we can think. And though I was compelled to write a science fiction epic based on a situation where it looks like we've come to the end of the line for organic evolution, because...
And that's Parallel Journeys, right?
Right. And, I felt just like some of these AI engineers have left their jobs, I feel that this content is so important. I've made all my work available free on my website. Now, people can get Parallel Journeys on Amazon and listen to it as an Audible. I think that's the best way, or a paperback. But you can also read it free on my website and my Singularity book, because there's no point, as much as I'd like to sell books, there's no point if human civilization is at existential risk, which it absolutely is. And already, we don't have to wait for AGI for that, because even the limited versions of it we have right now can be weaponized in all kinds of ways.
Does this scare you, Jonathan?
Well, no, in the sense that because the singularity archetype relates to two parallel event horizons, death and the evolutionary metamorphosis. So it was always kind of built into my thinking and based on my own paranormal experiences that I'm headed toward an event horizon. We all are, whether it's personal death or it's a species metamorphosis. That's the nature of our reality. I'm a believer in teleological evolution. So was Charles Darwin. It means that evolution has a certain direction. It's not trendlessly fluctuating like a lot of neo-Darwinists think. And so I think it's been heading in this direction. So it's a very inevitable kind of thing, though the ways it may play out are incredibly varied and strange.
Interesting.
But I think there's an inevitability to it, and there's no going back.
Jonathan Zapp with us, and his books are called Crossing the Event Horizon. The other is Parallel Journeys, and available, as he said, at Amazon, but also available for a free download from his website, which we have linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. We're going to come back in a moment with Jonathan and take an hour of phone calls as we talk about artificial intelligence. Is it the beginning of the viral apocalypse? Can it destroy us? What do you think? Chime in. Let's get your views on this. He presents some very provocative possibilities, to be sure. And it's really strange. And you can email Jonathan through his website, which again is Zapp, Z-A-P, oracle.com.